Welcome back to Smarter Green Living. Have you noticed that Britain is generating more electricity from wind, solar, and other renewable sources than at any point in its history? Experts say renewable electricity is now among the cheapest forms of new power generation available. Naturally, you would expect that to translate into lower energy bills. Then your latest bill arrives, and instead of feeling the benefits of this supposedly cheap energy revolution, you are left wondering why your costs still seem painfully high. At first glance, that feels like a contradiction. If renewable energy is becoming cheaper, surely households should be paying less. What you pay each month is influenced by a web of factors that extend far beyond generation costs. Wholesale energy markets, gas prices, network infrastructure, standing charges, supplier operating costs, government policies, VAT, and the expense of keeping the electricity system stable every second of every day are indicative of the price you pay. In this video, we are going to explore why cheap renewable energy does not automatically lead to cheap energy bills, why the price of gas still has influence over electricity price, and what changes would be needed before consumers begin to feel the full financial benefits of cleaner energy. One of the most common assumptions in the energy debate is that once renewable electricity becomes cheap, it should immediately reflect in the household energy bills. After all, if the cost of producing something goes down, most people expect the price they pay to go down as well. The problem is that electricity systems do not operate as this, because electricity arriving at your home is part of a much larger system, and the price you pay reflects the costs of that entire system rather than just the cheapest source of generation available. Your bill includes the cost of purchasing electricity on wholesale markets, transporting it through transmission and distribution networks, balancing supply and demand in real time, covering supplier operating expenses, funding various policy schemes, and paying taxes and standing charges. And gas? The reason lies in how electricity markets are structured. In the UK, electricity is commonly priced using a system known as marginal pricing. Under this approach, generators are brought into the market according to their costs, with the cheapest sources typically supplying electricity first. Because wind, solar, and nuclear power generally have relatively low operating costs, they often enter the market before gas-fired power stations. However, electricity demand is constantly changing throughout the day. There are periods when renewable generation alone cannot meet demand, either because consumption is particularly high or because weather conditions reduce renewable output. When that happens, gas-fired power stations are often called upon to fill the gap. When gas becomes the final source needed to satisfy demand, it can effectively determine the wholesale electricity price for that period. As a result, even electricity generated cheaply by wind or solar can end up being sold at a price influenced by much more. The market price is often influenced by whichever generator is needed last to keep the lights on. One useful way to think about the electricity market is to imagine a live auction that never stops. At every moment, the grid operator needs enough electricity to satisfy demand. The cheapest generators are brought in first because they can provide power at the lowest cost. However, if demand continues to rise beyond what those generators can supply, additional and often more expensive generators must be added. Eventually, the system reaches the point where the final generator needed to meet demand determines the market price. That does not mean every unit of electricity was expensive to produce. Instead, it means the market settled at the price required to secure enough electricity for everyone who needed it. Because of these reasons, households are not receiving the full benefit of the lower cost generation from renewable energy. The truth is, renewable energy remains one of the most important tools available for reducing emissions, improving energy security, and lowering dependence on volatile fossil fuel markets. As more renewable electricity enters the system, less gas is needed overall. That reduces fuel imports, lowers carbon emissions, and helps shield the country from some of the price shocks that have repeatedly affected global gas markets. However, generating cheap electricity and delivering lower bills are not exactly the same thing. For renewable energy to have its maximum impact on household energy costs, the wider energy system must be capable of capturing and distributing those savings effectively. That means first, having enough storage to save excess renewable electricity when production is high. Second, having a grid capable of transporting electricity efficiently across the country. Third, encouraging flexible demand so consumers can use more electricity when it is abundant and cheaper. Fourth, it also means reforming market structures so that low-cost renewable electricity is not constantly pulled upward by expensive gas generation. Alongside that, long-term contracts can help ensure that the benefits of cheaper generation are shared more directly with consumers rather than being lost within market volatility. When politicians, campaigners, or energy companies claim that renewable energy will reduce bills, the statement is not necessarily wrong. The problem is that it is often presented without enough context. If electricity markets continue to be influenced by expensive gas generation, if storage remains limited, if network constraints persist, and if standing charges continue to rise, then the savings created by renewable energy may not immediately appear on household energy bills. Another reason renewable energy has not lowered household energy bills is because electricity generation represents only one component of what consumers pay. If you look at your bill, you are paying not only for the energy you use, but also for the infrastructure and services required to deliver that energy reliably. The unit rate reflects the electricity or gas you consume, but the standing charge covers fixed costs that exist regardless of how much energy you use. These costs include maintaining networks, supporting system operations, and funding various aspects of the energy infrastructure. Even if renewable electricity becomes cheaper, the wider system still requires investment. Transmission lines need upgrading, distribution networks need maintenance, suppliers have operating expenses, policy programs require funding, taxes still apply. As the energy system evolves, additional investment is also needed for storage technologies, digital infrastructure, resilience measures, and grid modernization. Contracts for difference explained. Simply, one mechanism designed to address some of these challenges is the contract for difference, commonly known as a CFD. The basic idea is a low-carbon electricity generator is offered a long-term agreed price, known as a strike price, for the electricity it produces. If market prices fall below that agreed level, the generator receives a payment to make up the difference. On the other hand, if market prices rise above the strike price, the generator pays money back into the scheme. This arrangement creates greater certainty for investors, while also helping consumers benefit when wholesale prices become unusually high. Although contracts for difference do not eliminate every issue within the energy market, they can reduce exposure to extreme gas-driven price spikes and provide a more stable framework for renewable investment. However, not every generator operates under these arrangements. Some older renewable and nuclear projects remain exposed to wholesale market prices, which means they can still benefit when gas prices push electricity prices higher. That is one reason discussions about market reform continue. You will often hear calls to break the link between gas prices and electricity prices. Some proposals focus on expanding fixed-price contracts for low-carbon generators. One of the defining characteristics of renewable energy is that it depends on natural conditions. Solar panels generate the most electricity when sunlight is abundant, while wind turbines perform best when wind speeds are favourable. Unfortunately, those periods do not always align perfectly with when people need electricity most. Household demand often peaks during the evening when people return home, prepare meals, use appliances, and heat their homes. Yet renewable generation may not always be strongest at those times. When renewable generation is abundant but demand is low, electricity prices can fall significantly. Conversely, when renewable output is limited during periods of high demand, gas-fired generation may once again become necessary. That is why storage and flexibility are becoming increasingly important. Battery systems can store electricity for later use. Pumped hydro facilities can provide larger-scale storage where geography permits. Flexible demand programs can encourage consumers to shift certain activities to periods when electricity is cheaper and cleaner. Smart tariffs, for example, can reward households for charging electric vehicles, heating water, or running appliances during off-peak periods. The more flexibility the system has, the more effectively it can capture the value of renewable energy and pass those benefits on to consumers. Another factor that receives far less attention than it deserves is the electricity grid itself. Renewable energy is often generated in locations that are far from major centres of demand. Offshore wind farms, for example, may produce enormous amounts of electricity, but that electricity still needs to be transported efficiently to homes and businesses. When the grid lacks sufficient capacity, congestion can occur. In some situations, renewable generators may be paid to reduce their output because the network cannot accommodate all the electricity being produced. At the same time, other generators located closer to demand may be paid to increase production. These costs do not simply disappear. They become part of the overall cost of operating the system and ultimately influence what consumers pay. This is why building renewable generation alone is not enough. The supporting infrastructure must evolve alongside it. Transmission lines, distribution networks, storage facilities, planning processes, and digital control systems all play essential roles in ensuring renewable electricity can be used efficiently. There is another important reality that often gets overlooked. Even if electricity becomes increasingly renewable, many households still rely directly on gas for heating, hot water, and cooking. As long as that remains the case, those households continue to be exposed to fluctuations in gas prices regardless of how clean the electricity system becomes. This means that reducing energy bills is not solely about transforming electricity generation. It is also about reducing dependence on fossil gas within homes. Improved insulation can reduce heating demand. Heat pumps may provide an alternative in suitable properties. Heat networks can serve some urban areas. Smarter controls can improve efficiency and reduce waste. Ultimately, the cheapest energy is often the energy that never needs to be used in the first place. That is why improving building efficiency remains one of the most effective ways to reduce household energy costs over the long term. What would actually lower bills? If the goal is to ensure that cheaper renewable energy translates into lower household energy bills, several developments need to happen simultaneously. The UK needs more low-carbon electricity operating under stable long-term contracts that reduce exposure to volatile fossil fuel markets. Gas generation needs to play a smaller role in setting electricity prices, particularly during periods of peak demand. Storage technologies and flexible demand systems must expand so that renewable electricity can be used more effectively when it is available. Grid infrastructure must be upgraded to move clean electricity efficiently across the country. At the same time, policymakers need to examine standing charges and network costs because consumers ultimately care about the total amount they pay, not just wholesale market prices. Improving energy efficiency across homes is equally important because reducing demand lowers costs throughout the entire system. Most importantly, there needs to be honesty in the public conversation. Renewable energy can reduce long-term exposure to fossil fuel price shocks and help create a more stable energy future. However, lower generation costs alone do not guarantee lower household bills unless the wider system is designed to deliver those savings to consumers. The reality is that cheap renewable energy, by itself, does not automatically lower your energy bill. What it does lower is the cost of generating electricity, and while that is an important achievement, it is not the same thing as reducing the final amount households pay each month. Your energy bill reflects the cost of an entire system rather than a single source of generation. Until that system evolves, many consumers will continue to experience what feels like a contradiction: renewable energy becoming cheaper while household bills remain heavily influenced by gas prices and broader system costs. That contradiction does not prove that renewable energy has failed. Instead, it highlights how important market design, infrastructure investment, storage capacity, consumer protections, and energy efficiency really are. If this video helped you better understand why energy bills do not always fall as quickly as renewable generation grows, be sure to subscribe for more clear, practical, and evidence-based sustainability content. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.